It's been a great morning. There's been a lot going on, but I'm still just so thankful that you guys are so flexible and a fun group of people to be with. So we're going to read the scripture for the sermon this morning. It is Mark 8, 1 through 10. So if you'll read with me. In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat, he called the disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them, and he gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said these also should be set before them. And they ate, and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people. And he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. This is the word of the Lord.
Praise be to Christ. I'm kind of crazy about her. I don't mind showing it. My favorite line, this has nothing to do with anything, but I'm not even going to say it. Mark chapter 8 is where we're going to be today. I want to ask you kind of a serious question as we get started. You know, we've been here about 10 months now, and it's just been great. It really has. And I know, I'm supposed to say that, but I really mean it. It's been really wonderful. You guys are wonderful. We've met wonderful people in the community, and just wearing winter clothes is kind of fun, when you have not. I moved here with one pair of pants, and so here we are. Nevertheless, not all of it has been, unicorns and popsicles either, though. And there's been some hard times, and I've shared some of those with you. But I think last week really this month, we came from a church that we had started in Houston, and through God's bittersweet providence, we closed that chapter of our lives. And I think kind of grief, it is grief. Grief comes in stages and waves. It's like it doesn't all hit you at one time, and I think that's one of God's mercies to us. But different things strike it at different times, and so I think this month I had to do some legal stuff and officially closing that chapter, and just resurfaced a bunch of stuff. And I just felt myself in these really difficult situations this week, just mainly in my head, just thinking and processing. And it got me thinking about difficult situations. And so when I was reading Mark 8, I was surprised and also very comforted that difficult situations is something that Mark himself and the scriptures talk about a lot. And do you know why? Because life is full of difficult situations. I say that phrase, difficult situations, and I'm willing to bet that most of you have a situation that you're thinking of that you have either gone through or you watched someone else go through. Because they are very much a part of our human experience. And so this week I was on a quest. I was just feeling very, thoughtful or whatever. I was just like, my first thought was, what actually is a difficult situation? Like, can we put language behind it? Can we define it? And then secondly, how do people, and I don't mean just religious people, I don't mean just Christian people, I mean people of the human race, how do we cope? Where do we find hope in difficult situations? And so, like a good millennial, I just put it on Facebook and just kind of see what would happen. And I was overwhelmed and humbled by the responses that I got. Pretty significant sample size. The other reason why I wanted to do that was because You can read articles and books about these different things, and that's wonderful, and that has a place, and I'm not anti that. Please don't hear me say that. But sometimes I want to know what real people think about this. Does that make sense? I want to know real people that you and I go to work with, that we play with, that we play games with, not play with them, but that we go to restaurants around, like that. People that we live around. How do real people deal with these things? How do we define them? How do we cope through them? And some of the responses I got were just absolutely fantastic. So I was looking at the different responses, and I was able to categorize, and this is not expansive, but this is based on some things that I was told. I was able to situate a lot of these difficult situations, or at least the way people identify them, in 3 different challenges of life. So every difficult situation fits into at least one of these 3 different categories. The first was life transitions and the challenges that brings, whether it be death or divorce or leaving home for the first time. Those subtle and not subtle obstructions to life place us in a difficult situation. But there was also another category that I found fascinating and also very burdensome, and that was challenges in mental and physical health. Things like chronic illness. Even several people sharing, and I'm so thankful for, sharing stories about domestic violence. Basic stress and fatigue, and also obtuse stress and fatigue, constituted this category of mental and physical challenges, which breed to these challenging situations. And the last category was family dynamics. And out of the 3, this may have been the largest category. Parents sharing things about their life as single parents, or sharing things about having strong-willed children at home, which most of us probably, I'm a strong-willed child, so sorry, this was funnier in my head. Strong-willed children can be a cause, can be a contributing factor to challenging family dynamics, which leads to difficult situations. Kids with chronic illnesses themselves, kids that are estranged from their parents, or vice versa, parents estranged from children. All of these are contributing factors, big contributing factors, that lead to these challenging situations that we find ourselves in. Now go back and think about your challenging situation that I didn't even prompt you to think of. You're probably already thinking about it. Does it find its way in one of these different categories? I imagine it does. The second thing I learned that I want to share with you, which I think is absolutely beautifully wonderful, and it's not just people able to identify or describe these challenging situations, but also our innate ability to cope and find hope through them. Again, these are people from all over the spiritual spectrum. But what was fascinating is all of them had 3 different contingencies by which they found hope in the midst of challenging situations. And all of them were senses of hope or coping mechanisms where they were reaching outside of themselves for aid. So there were 3 categories by which people were saying, these are the things that help me. And the first was seeking strength from other people. Various communities that they're a part of, families, friends, loved ones. The second was seeking compassion from other people, asking for help, reading different books, listening to music, offering forgiveness even. So those 2 components of seeking outside strength and seeking outside compassion, mixed with the third category of seeking some kind of transcendence, was a fascinating discovery for me. Because here's what I learned. Wherever you're at on the spiritual spectrum, something inside of you immediately, like a reflex, when you're in a difficult situation, is reaching beyond yourself to find 2 massive pillars of hope: strength and compassion. Wherever you are on the spiritual spectrum. Now, here's the question that we're going to wrestle with, because Mark is going to make us wrestle with it. The question is this. It's not, are you searching for something to make you strong and to give you compassion? You're already doing that. So am I. The question is what you're seeking out actually giving you the comfort that you really need? Are you seeking out ultimate sources of compassion and strength? Mark is saying it's available to us, and it's right here. So here's a question I want us to wrestle with, and it's this. And this is a real, I don't mean this in an ethereal kind of like abstract way. Like, one thing I love about New Englanders is like, you guys are so good at like just get to the point. Like, this needs to be real. I won't call him out, but I had a conversation with someone one time. He was like, I just don't have time for, like, I need authenticity. And it wasn't like a millennial, trying to be cool. Like, it was real. It was, I need real substance. I've been through enough things in my life to where I need something real to hang on to. And I just loved that so much. And so when I say here, this is the question we're going to wrestle with, I don't mean it in an abstract way. At the end of the day, what comfort does this God of the Bible give us when we're in difficult situations? Like, what real comfort? What real comfort can we take to the bank that this God is going to provide for us? Because at the end of the day, if it's not better than something else, what are we doing? I think it is better. I'm thoroughly convinced it's better, and Mark is going to show us why. Look at verse 1. In verse 1, Mark says, in those days when a great crowd had gathered, they had nothing to eat. The first thing Mark is going to do is show us that this God, the way that he comforts us in the midst of our difficult situations, is he gives us an incredible amount of his own compassion. An incredible amount of his own compassion. The first thing that we realize when Mark is showing us this is that there is a problem that Jesus is being confronted with. That there is a lack of substance, there is a lack of food, and Jesus is looking at these people saying, I don't know if you're going to make it home because you've been with me for a long time, and I don't know how long it's been since you haven't eaten, but you certainly are not eating now. So Jesus is in this difficult situation observing the potential downfall of these individual people, which I think is fascinating that Jesus is so concerned with their physical being, right? He's not so much worried that they took all the notes of all of his, theological lectures and stuff that he gave. Doesn't seem to be as concerned with that as their physicality, which is a rabbit we can't chase today, but I think it's very interesting. But this story roots itself in the fact that there is a difficult situation occurring, and Jesus is going to interact with it. So before we get too deep into the story, we need to ask ourselves, because if you've been with us through the series of Mark, we've already seen Jesus do this before. So there's a big scholarly debate that I'm not going to give too much attention to, but there's a big debate as to, is this a recounting of the story that we already heard in chapter 6, or is this a separate occurrence? And I think the evidence lends itself, narratively speaking, that this being a separate occurrence, which in and of itself is fascinating because it means that Jesus feeds thousands of people twice. Well, why do we think it's a separate occurrence and maybe not just a rehashing of the first one? Well, the first one, the narrative differences are pretty complete in offering the weightier evidence of this being something separate. Like in the first feeding, we're told that there's 5 loaves and 2 fishes. In this one, it's just 7, and then a few fishes. Probably one of the more interesting ones to me is the word that's used for fish is different, which makes sense if you're doing the miracle in a separate location or a different region from where you did the last time. The population of fish is even different. The population of crowd numbers is different. Jesus' involvement versus the disciples' involvement is very different. But here's the big one. Ready? Here's the big reason why I think we need to consider this a separate narrative. Because in the first account, it seems to correspond with Jesus feeding primarily a large Jewish audience. But in the second one, remember, he's in Gentile world now. And so the people in which he is feeding are Gentiles. And in this, Mark is making a huge point that we need to consider and see. And here's the point that Mark is making. Right off the bat, the compassion that Jesus is showing for these individuals, the compassion that he's offering are for a people who by Jewish own esteem are not worthy of receiving such compassion. You see, the Jewish people, for all the wonderful things Their downfall is they misinterpret the word of the Lord in the first century and think that they are superior to every other nation that is not Jewish. Did God choose them? Did he give them special privilege and promises in the covenants and the patriarchs? Yes, all of these things, yes. But all of those things were never only for them. They were to be an outsourcing to bless the nations so that every man, woman, and child from every tongue and nation would come to know the beauty and the majesty of their Creator. But Israel begins to hoard these things. So then when Jesus comes on the scene as a Jewish man, he begins to break the mold by showing compassion, charisma, care to these individuals who the Jewish people formerly had deemed not worthy of those things. Jesus is smashing the paradigm because he's giving compassion to the very people that he's not supposed to. I love provocative Jesus. This is textbook provocative Jesus. What does it mean when he shows compassion? Well, look at the end of verse 1. He calls his disciples to himself and he says, I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me for 3 days and have nothing to eat. They're in a difficult situation. And here's his fear that if I send them away, hungry to their homes, they'll faint on the way, and some of them have come from really, really far. You know, compassion is one of those things, obviously we can define it linguistically. And I think that's helpful. Right? So John Frederick defines it, the basic meaning of the verb has to do with having pity or helping a person out in a difficult situation. It can be used to describe acts from a human perspective or from a God to a human perspective, right? And I think that's helpful. Linguistics are helpful. It gives us some categories. But at the end of the day, don't you want to know, what did it feel like for Jesus to have compassion for these people? Like, what does compassion feel like? Like, phenomenologically, experientially, like, what is it like to show compassion to this degree with this amount of fervor? Like, that's what I want to know. And I think that's where James Edwards helps us out a tremendous deal. See, what he says, Jesus sees this difficult situation the crowd is undergoing, that they don't have food, that some of them are going to get injured and maybe possibly even lose their lives. He knows they're being threatened, and he, watch this, is expressing a gut-wrenching emotion on behalf of the crowd. See, Jesus is not just looking at him and saying, I feel so bad for you. No. He's looking at them, having a moving, gut-wrenching, emotional response to their difficult situation. Why? Or better yet, what does this even mean? It means this, that Jesus' compassion as the Son of God, wrapped in human flesh, flows from his own righteous character. It's who he is. It's not because the people have merited this compassion from him. It's not that he's been so moved by them because they're outstanding citizens. He's moved with compassion because he's an outstanding God who cares deeply for the creatures that he has made and sustains with his mere breath. He's moved deeply for them in ways in which you and I can't even fathom, because his compassion is perfect and it's righteous and it's real and it's true. And he begins to set his affection and his compassion on them. And what's so incredibly, incredibly comforting is to know this. Now, some of you, based on whatever difficult situation you're dealing with right now, and I want to give you full permission for the next 10 seconds to just absolutely think that this is not true, or that I don't know how that could be true, or just to completely zone out. This is a safe space. You have absolute permission. But I want to tell you something that I want you to put in your utility belt so that later you can think about it, and that's this. If Jesus can show this much compassion on these people, why in the world do you think that he cannot show you the same compassion? This is who he is. This is what he does. And whether you and I can believe it in the moment or not, it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it untrue. It is true. He has compassion. He is compassion, and it's perfect, and it's ultimate, and it's wonderful. And at the end of the day, as glorious as it is, it's actually not enough. And the disciples are going to bring that out in verse 4. Look what the disciple says. I love the disciples here. I think this is the most highly relatable response to this situation. They look at Jesus and they say, hey, Jesus, we love you so much, but how in the world can one feed or satisfy, is another way that can be translated. How can one satisfy these people with bread in this desolate place? Do you see the problem they're bringing up? Like, Jesus, we know that you're like really, you're having this gut-wrenching moment, and that's awesome, and it's wonderful, but how does this happen? How are we going to help them? See, because Jesus is ultimate compassion, and he offers his compassion for us, not based on who we are, but based on who he is. But that's not all he offers us. He also offers us, in our most difficult situations, his own ultimate strength. He offers us his compassion, but he also offers us his ultimate strength. If you look at verse 5, he says, Mark writes, and he asked them, how many loaves do you have? They said 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And then we skip down to verse 8. Mark writes, and they ate and were satisfied. And they took the broken pieces up after 7 baskets full, and there were about 4,000 people he sent away. The very thing the disciples ask is, Jesus, who can satisfy these people? And Jesus says, it's a great question. Watch while I do it. Let me answer your question with what I'm about to do, because he offers his strength in this terrible of situations. Now, it's not lost on me that this is a crazy story. Can we just be honest for a second? Like, this story is nuts. Especially if this really is the second time that Jesus feeds thousands of people. I'm just going to be really honest with you. I have never read this story, and my first thought is, wow, this is so believable, right? I always read this story, and I'm like, man, were a couple zeros fudged here? Is there a corner store not, within distance? They could have ordered, some stuff. I'm just being honest. It's a hard one to swallow. And I also don't think I'm alone in that. And I think that when it comes to miracles in the Bible in particular, which is kind of the elephant in the room, anytime you're looking at a story like this, it can be challenging and it can be hard. And if it's not challenging and it's not hard for you, that's wonderful. And that's fantastic. But please, hear from someone who is naturally skeptical. It can be and is a barrier for a lot of people that you love deeply. Miracles in the Bible can be a huge barrier for people actually considering trusting in God's strength in a difficult time. Now, I don't think that should scare us, but I think it should at least let us think, to take the critique seriously. So let's talk about it for a second. Let's talk about this elephant in the room. Is this even possible? Well, one of the reasons why this is so hard to swallow, it is so hard to believe for us and then the people that we love, is because we definitively really believe in our moment in history that science has really disproven any need for the miraculous. Like we are just a society where that is just a given. Like the mantra or the theme or the premise behind all of that whole notion is really that science has proven that there's no such thing as miracles. And that seems like an airtight case. And we can probably reference certain people that have made this argument very, very well known and articulated it very well. When you read David Hume, so in your leisure, when you go read David Hume later, he's very convincing. Thank you. He's very convincing that miracles are just not something that we can identify as human beings at all. And I don't think that these rebuttals against miracles should make us angry. What I do think is it should push us and drive us, encourage us to find good answers. We never have to be afraid about things in the Bible that are true. We never have to be afraid. Why? Because the truth will always rise. Always. It will always rise. And even in this case, I think the truth does rise, as hard as it is to swallow. Because while there are the David Humes and the other people of the world who have given good rational reasons why we should ditch the idea of miracles, let's just give them that. It's granted. Okay. There's also a whole host of other people have contributed largely to why we should absolutely embrace miracles. Let me give you this illustration. It's my favorite illustration by Alvin Plantinga, who's a professor, Duke? I can't remember where he's. Anyways, you email me later. He gives this illustration. So let's do this. Imagine with me for a second. Imagine with me that you're at your favorite pub on a Friday night, wherever that may be. And you're enjoying the happy hour, and then you notice a person like really enjoying a happy hour. And you think, this is getting ugly really quick. So then the person, obviously they cut him off and they tell him, you got to go. So he goes outside, he starts walking, and it's 4 o'clock, in New England, so it's pitch black already, and they're walking to their car, and you notice that they're stumbling around and they're trying to find their keys. And so you notice that they're by the car and they're fidgeting with their pockets, and they're even looking in their shoe, and they're looking underneath the car, and then they very quickly leave that area because there's a street light behind the building. And they go over to the street light, and they get down on all hands and all four. They get down on the ground, and they're crawling, and they're looking for their keys in this one spot. And you notice for a while they don't leave there. They stay where the illumination is brightest. So you go over to them and you say, hey, what are you doing? And they say, I'm looking for my car keys. And you say, well, can I help you? And they say, yes, it'll be great. Find a spot over here by the light. And then you ask them this, why do you think it's over here? And then they respond, my keys have to be right here because this is where the light is the greatest. Now watch this. In that moment, what is occurring is the person by his own admission is saying that the keys can't possibly be out in the dark because that would be much, much more difficult to find versus me finding them underneath a light. When all the while, the keys are not under the light. That's just where the light is greatest. Science is wonderful. Science is amazing. Science is a part of God's plan that we would use in his world. We do not need to demonize science. At the same time, what if science is one lens by which we see the world, but there's also other lenses by which we see the world? Well, that would mean that one lens can't interpret all of life. What if there are aspects of life that can only be accurately interpreted and experienced through a lens that promotes a God who exists, a God who creates the world, and a God who can do whatever he wants inside of this world? Just because the light is greater here doesn't mean there's not truth where it's harder to find. Science and the Bible don't have to be an angry divorce couple. They work in harmony together. And I think that's why Mark is showing us this. So there's good reason to believe in miracles. But I do understand the skepticism, and I do understand the complications it can bring. Mark writes this, I think, for an entirely different purpose than to try to prove to us that miracles exist, though. And I love what Keller says. He says that Jesus' miracles are not just proofs that his power or his strength is mighty. Sure, they do that. They absolutely do that. But they're also a wonderful foretaste of what he's going to do with that power and strength. Jesus' miracles are not just challenges to our minds, but promises to our hearts that the world we want is coming. Friends, even in the most difficult of situations, we are reminded that Jesus' strength is unparalleled. He is the one who can feed, who can satisfy the thousands with nothing, because his strength is that strong. And just as his compassion is made available to these people, his strength is as well. In our difficult times, he also offers us his unparalleled, majestic strength. Let's circle all the way back. I wanted us to think about this question: what comfort does God give us when we face difficult situations? And here's the answer. Here's a answer. Our difficult situations provoke God's compassion and his strength on our behalf. And let me add this caveat: whether we can see it or not, it's there. Whether we can feel it or not in the moment, it's there. And it's ultimate, and it's true. And it's the comfort that you and I need to not just process what a difficult situation is, but to have hope in the midst of it. And so how do we do that? Well, I think Mark is going to show us that this miracle that Jesus does really is not even the greatest miracle that he's going to do. Yes, his compassion is there, his strength is there, but ultimately, Jesus didn't come in the world just to provide a meal for people. He came to provide and to satisfy the very thing that contributes to us having to go through difficult situations at all: sin and brokenness. And not too long from this event, Jesus himself is going to willingly put himself in a very difficult situation where he will be betrayed by everyone he loved, where he will be beaten for crimes he didn't commit, where he will hang high on a cross for guilt and shame that was not his. He will receive no compassion. No one will be strong for him. He will cry out to his own Father, "Father, where are you?" And he will die as a criminal. He will die lonely and afraid. And we say, why? Because, friends, at the end of the day, the cross is a symbol where the compassion of God and the strength of God meet. It's the point in time and history where Jesus stands in our place in the most compassionate act of all time, and then the strength of God to take our sins on his back so that we would not receive the debt that we owe, but we would receive his righteousness instead. It's the intersection, the crosses between God's compassion and his strength. To give us, to reinforce us with an infinite hope, with an infinite compassion, with an infinite strength, so that when we go through difficult situations, because it's never a matter of if, right? It's always a matter of when. When we go through those situations, we can be reforged in the knowledge that God is deeply compassionate for us, and he is infinitely strong on our behalf. I don't know why you are going through or have gone through, or someone that you love is going through the difficult situation that they are. I don't know. I wish I could take it away. I wish I could take my own away. But I can't, and I know you can't. But here's the comfort. Here's the most comforting thing that I have to daily remind myself of, and I just would invite you to do the same, and it's this. When we're going through a difficult situation, for all the unknowns, here's one thing you absolutely can know for certain. The cross proves that your difficult situation is not because God is not compassionate for you. And it's not because he is not strong for you. And it's not that he doesn't care about you. Look at the cross. Jesus goes to the cross to prove your worth and value and significance. That's why he does it. As hard as it is, we have to resolve to trust that, even when we don't feel it, because it's true and because it's good. If you're going through a difficult situation, I'm sorry. I really am. But I want you to know this is true, and we can hold on to this. And secondly, I want you to know that you have a community here that really cares about you. And I'm not just saying that. There are people that we can lean on in these hard times. And maybe you're not going through a difficult situation. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to allow someone to lean on you. Trust Christ. Trust him. His compassion for you and his strength for you is infinite. And there is No comparison. Let's pray. Lord, I'm thankful that you are compassionate and that you are strong. And Lord, I'm just also so thankful that you've hardwired us to look for those very things in our time of need. I mean, what a blessing. Father, would we find our ultimate sense of satisfaction in you? Would we find what you have done for us absolutely beautiful, and would that charge the rest of our lives? Father, might we be great witnesses for you. Might we love people who are in difficult situations. And Father, might we cling to your promises as we go through our own difficult situations. We love you. We trust you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.